Welcome to Altar of the Demo Gods. If you're wondering what advice from two experienced sales engineers sounds like, it's a little like this.
Welcome back to Altar of the Demo Gods, a new podcast for sales engineers. I say new because this is our second episode. And my name is Keith Wilson. I guess I should introduce myself. My partner here, John Morton. John, how you doing tonight?
I'm doing pretty good. I'm about 3 fingers deep now into some whiskey, so I'm feeling all right, Keith.
Three fingers deep in whiskey. When I was in high school, I wanted to name my band 3 Fingers Deep for a whole different reason.
In the modern world, I don't know how we interpret that, but I like it because 3 fingers deep of whiskey is pretty good. I'll leave it as that.
Yeah, and it could be completely open for interpretation. So the topic of today's show, we're going to talk about exploring career paths and opportunities in sales engineering, which is interesting because we started to get into this a little bit in our last show. So if you didn't listen to episode 1, what did we talk about, John? We talked about kind of how we've seen sales engineering change over time.
What is a sales engineer?
The topic was
first and foremost.
Yeah, we talked about what is a sales engineer, what do they do. We had our acronym
OKR
of the day, which was OKR, and that is well, what is it?
Objectives,
and what does OKR
key results,
stand for?
and initiatives.
Okay, so objectives, key results, and initiatives. OKR. That was the last one. I'm gonna let you choose. You chose the last one too, but you can choose this one. What's the acronym?
I
for
think
this
if
one?
we're talking about career growth, baby, we should reflect it in OTE.
OTE.
That's
OTE.
Oscar Tango Echo.
That is the acronym for sales engineers. And what does OTE stand for?
On target earnings.
Do you remember? I almost forgot because it's one of those things that you just say OTE so much now you don't actually say the word. You say on target earnings, or you say OTE, on target earnings. And I mean it on its face, you could probably figure out what it means. Go ahead and explain it to me like I'm 5 this time.
Yeah,
John.
I like the Sesame Street breakdown. So this is the Sesame Street acronym of the day, OTE, on target earnings. It basically means when you get a job offer to be a sales engineer, however you want to quantify that, you are going to be paid this much money for achieving your target on target earnings.
Yeah. And so what you'll see, at least from my experience in software sales, it also reflects your split of your base salary and your commission. So generally, you're going to make some sort of base salary. Unlike a lot of sales positions, there's tons of sales positions out there that don't make a base salary. They are 100% commission. They also make a shitload of money usually. But our position, we have a little bit more safety. So we get base pay, right? And then you have your commission on top of that. So you may hear a split, a 75-25 split. What that means is 75% base pay, 25% commission, 80-20 split, 80% base pay, 20% commission, right? So that determines your OTE is the total amount of money that you make. And I even would consider the split part of that OTE too.
I would, because you could argue the
split. It's a separate term,
Yeah.
but it's important.
Yeah, you could always argue the split. And to that point, like just to break it down a little bit further. So normally in enterprise or in software sales, the account executive or sales rep owns a lot more of the risk of generating new revenue. I feel like I'm talking at people, not with people. So that's why, to Keith's point, sometimes they're 100% commission because their entire salary may be based on the sales that they close. The beauty of tech sales or being an SE is what we're talking about with OTE. You offset a lot of that risk of having to generate new revenue. You work with your account executive or your sales rep to attain a certain quota, but you don't necessarily own 100% of that quota, meaning, to Keith's point, you may have a 70% base where most of your pay comes from that base and you only have 30% risk where the reward is in that commission. So there is a little bit of an offset there, at least in software sales.
Yeah. Yeah. So again, OTE, on target earnings, that's the total amount of compensation you would get if you hit 100% of your sales goals for the year.
100%.
Right? So I think it's an accurate way to say it. What else did we talk about? I think that covered a lot of the last episode.
I did. Career
trajectory. If you want to know more, go back and listen.
Yeah, what we do, me and Keith,
that's
roles.
what we want to talk about now. Yeah. Well, what we want to talk about now is the career trajectory. We want to talk about, you said this is something you get asked about a lot.
So here we are. So the net of last episode, you find out over the course of life, you're sitting at a bar, chatting up somebody you may be interested in, and you're really good at explaining things simply. Pokemon is more than just a card game. Fortnite is more than just a video game. You have a very good way of articulating things in a simple way. You find out that's what you're good at. That's when you know you're a good SE. Now you've applied for sales engineering jobs, solutions architect, whatever it may be, technical sales at the end of the day. What does it look like for you to grow in that opportunity, I think, is we want to cover here, right?
Yeah, I think this is a good part to tell your story too, because let's talk about that initial transition into sales engineer. Generally, you don't go right from college to sales engineer, at least in software.
We covered
sales.
this too.
Generally, yeah, in security, you need a pretty good amount of experience. I think they've lowered the bar a bit, but when I first became an SE, they were looking for, I think, 7 to 10 years minimum experience in the technical thing that you're working with, right? In my case, cybersecurity. I transitioned into it from support. So I worked in support, which was good because it got me, talking to customers a lot, finding out what customers care about, what they run into, help me build up an empathy for the customers when they go through these different problems with the product, right? And you just learn to interact with customers really well if you do the job right. Then I went into an inside sales engineer role. So that's another term before we get too far. You may hear the terms inside and outside sales.
Yeah.
Inside simply means you work in an office and you don't go to a customer. Outside, you're in the field, you travel, you will go to a customer site. Although in the new, post-COVID world where a lot of people are remote and a lot of people don't even have offices anymore, I'd imagine there's still a lot of remote aspects to it, but you're still out in the field. You know when you work outside sales versus inside sales. Did I explain that okay?
You explained it beautifully. Yeah, inside sales means you spend a lot of time behind your computer in the modern age, which really drives me crazy because I'm a lot older than I look, even though my old boss used to say I have a face for radio. Hurt my feelings. Is, you can actually not have your camera on. So you do Zoom or, Teams, whatever it is. That's inside sales. You have a bunch of little meetings, smaller transactions versus, to your point, you're in the field, you're meeting customers. You're traveling to different sites to meet them. There's also one more aspect I would say, at least in what we know of software sales, is channel, but we'll leave that complexity for another day. So yeah, good summary.
Yeah, so I worked doing inside sales, and one of my main roles and one of the biggest skills I picked up on doing inside sales was filling in RFPs, which we're going to save that for an acronym.
Enemy number one
for another
in
show.
John Morton's life is the RFP. We'll save that for a special day.
Yeah, that deserves its own episode. We should probably have guests too.
Multiple.
Yeah, because it's the dread of every SE, but it's super important that you know how to do it because it's something that hasn't gone away and probably won't go away, especially if you work with government contracts or very large companies. The more bureaucracy, the more likely you are to fill in an RFP, and we'll get into that later. Anyways, I picked up that skill there.
For an enemy,
and then I did a lot of remote demos for smaller dollar accounts. I like that, smaller dollar. It's my rap name. Smaller dollar. So for smaller dollar customers,
smaller dollar, baby.
that's what they call me. All I got is singles.
Sir, you can't even cover the interest. But anyway.
Sir, this is the grocery store. Please stop making it rain.
With your coupons. Cat food coupons, bro. That ain't... You can't pay the cover on a cat food coupon.
Okay, so I learned these I learned to demo that way, right? I learned to tailor my demo, and I think we've got a whole other episode we'll definitely do on how to demo and all the tips we can give for that. And it really just eased me in. Like, I think I had this very soft sort of approach easing into becoming a sales engineer. I know that's not everybody else's experience, because right after that I transitioned into a field SE. How did that work for you? What did that process look like for you?
Yeah, man. So I love this question, because when I tell people, they're a little shocked, but I think that's the net of what we're going for with our podcast. What can happen when you believe in the universe, right? You believe in a little bit of magic. So I used to work at a company called Oppenheimer Funds. I don't mind calling it out now, because they were since acquired and have been dissolved. This was 12, 13 years ago. And I got a job as a security, in cybersecurity as a practitioner, doing what I did, managing a lot of identity sort of functions and features. And my boss at the time, super cool guy, he was my CISO, he's like, hey, we're always looking to buy new product. So over the course of my role as a practitioner, I was looking at new products to help defend the enterprise, right? And one of those products happened to be an identity product, and I got really chummed up with the sales team there. And they were like, you are very outgoing, you are very forward and easy to talk to. Have you ever considered a job in sales engineering? Now, my thought was, no, man, I made it to the pinnacle of success. I'm working for a finance company. I'm a defender. I spend day to day doing God's work, right? Then they told me about things like OTE, and that kind of piqued my interest. At that point, I said, well, what's involved?
When you found out how much larger their paychecks were than yours. Larger.
For any practitioner who is wondering why vendors don't mind that they get beat up the way they do, your OTE is amazingly and exponentially different. So I said, yeah, let me take a dive into the deep end. Now, at this point, it was a startup. They gave me a huge, opportunity, and I took every aspect of it on my own, and I immediately became a field SE, right? Matter of fact, I became a proof of concept specialist, another acronym for another day, POC. But at that point, I was meeting with customers, boots on the ground, building software, racking and stacking servers, and doing things from the ground up. And I had to learn the sales side of it. So I was very tech heavy, but I learned the sales side, and the rest was history, dude. I was extremely successful. I had 100% success rate in POCs, and astronomical gamble they took on me that turned into something fruitful.
Yeah. Okay. So now we've talked about how we both fell into the role of sales engineer, how we got started. I don't want to tell people how to navigate the whole career path, because there's so many different ways that can go. In your last course, you talked about what you do, or course. In our last episode, you talked about what you do as a field CTO. You evangelize. You talk to a lot of customers, and you kind of coach the sales engineers, right? I worked with he's a principal engineer or something like that at Cisco now. Actually, I'd love to get him on the show at some point, and he'll probably do it too. His name's TK Chianini. He was the CTO at Landcope when I worked there, and he would always say that the CTO is the top sales engineer, and the CEO is the top sales guy, right? That's how he looked at those executive positions. I mean, he would come out into the field with us occasionally, but he wasn't out there selling, right? He was doing a lot of the behind the scenes work, and he wasn't even managing SEs. Because that's another role too, right? Is SE manager. So outside of being a sales engineer and a field CTO, that's one path, have you had other roles?
Yeah. So, I've had a manager of SE role, and that's more bureaucratic, right? Um, Always aligning to sales, though. Selfishly, when I think about my OTE, again, word of the day, there's always more money to be had in sales. Nobody would refute that. Nobody would argue that. And if you deny that, then you're living in, the dark ages. So aligning to sales has its benefits, but for the most part, field CTO, sales engineer, POC specialist, solutions architect, manager of SEs.
What is what is what is a POC specialist? I haven't heard that term
so
before.
that's
I mean, obviously, to me, it sounds like all you do is run proofs of concept.
that was it. So back in the day, and I'm aging myself here. Back in the day when the world was a lot more complicated than SaaS, we won't go into how easy things are now because I sound like, again, Pete Simpson yelling at the old man about the cloud. But you actually had to know how to write on the fly code like Python. Back in the day, I had to write T-SQL and P-SQL, meaning if an SE who had enough sales acumen to get us into an opportunity and they had a proof of concept where we're demonstrating the value of a product, sometimes there were very unique systems they had to connect to. My absolute favorite is a mainframe. I hope some of our listeners know what this is, but it was the birth of everything. Goddamn Neuromancer, greatest book of all time. William Gibson, give it a read if you like hacking. But mainframes operated on 3270 terminal. And there were two main categories called RACF and Top Secret. Now, if you expected someone coming into a sales engineer role to understand that level of technical expertise, you're probably doing it wrong. So as a POC specialist, I came in and I knew those things. I knew how to write, and this is 12 years ago, Python code to extract RACF queries to partition LPARs in a mainframe over a 3270 terminal. Now that went super deep.
So you would in last episode we talked big S, little E, big, lots of sales, little engineering, big E, little S, lots of engineering, little sales. It sounds like that was a small S, big E.
You are absolutely correct. So POC specialist was small S, not as much sales, but big E. 100%.
So that was separate from the SC. Were you interacting with the customers during that?
I normally did, because in particular ecosystems where there's that much diversity and specialty, I would engage with the mainframe specialist, and this is a completely derogatory way to say it, but they were always considered graybeards. Mainframes came from the 60s. All the guys who knew how to, and ladies, but they were very few, there were more men than women disproportionately, were from the 60s, so they were considered graybeards. I knew how to talk to a graybeard in a very technical way in talking about mainframes. That was my specialty. I complemented, better together story, the sales team in selling to this particular business unit.
So you were there for the one person on their side that speaks that language. Yep. So they have somebody on the vendor side that they can speak that language too. You're there really just to alleviate the technical burden from that one person. Correct. Is what it sounds like.
Correct. So one thing to note, and we always sprinkle this in, I like to talk about sales on this too. If there's no pain, there's no opportunity. You can quote me on that, man. If there is in a sales opportunity, if a person doesn't have pain, they're not going to buy. So 99% of the time, that pain comes from something that's not understood, and it may be this particular business unit and this particular graybeard who's saying, you guys don't understand what I'm doing, or you all don't understand what I'm doing. You don't know my pain. I'm going to say no to this project. So my goal was to overcome that, that objection of no by appeasing to these folks.
Okay. That sounds like a very specialized SE. You guys must have had a lot of resources there. Because I know I've had plenty of SE roles where you're kind of expected to do it all.
Yeah, and to your point, back about sales, when you get a little deeper in startups where we're doing unique things like identity's vast. It's not a commodity product, meaning I can't go on the Amazon AWS marketplace and find a Yeti microphone, and buy it. I'm looking for something that's so unique. We need this sort of sales acumen. That's where technical sales has its most value. You have a little niche of what you do well, and you can provide value as better together for these sales teams. Yeah.
That's maybe it's a topic for another show, but I think it's worth at least discussing a little bit now too, is finding a specialty within sales engineers, because you can be a sales engineer and cross specialize in different things too. Again, I can speak more to software. Very easy jump would be, cybersecurity to health management systems, whatever, right? You have that technical acumen. You can just apply it to something else with a slight bit of training. Right. But I still think it's better to find a niche and specialize. That's why I still work in cybersecurity. That's why John still works in cybersecurity. That's why we have several friends that still work in cybersecurity instead of hopping around from niche to niche, because there is a lot of value when I go in for an interview, or when I pass the interview and I'm negotiating salary. There's a lot of value in me being very niche, very specific in what I do. But there's also a risk for me as well, because that limits the amount of companies I can apply to.
Correct. So I think, to bring it back to the net of it, oh man, Keith, I love working with you, man. I know a lot of people maybe just listen, but they can't see the smile on my face. There always has to be a foundation of, do you know how to sell software? If I put you in front of a customer, are you an idiot, right? Are you going to get drunk at the bar and puke everywhere and ruin this opportunity? I don't want that. Do you know how to talk to people? Yes. There's a foundation. Do you understand tech? Yes. But that niche, that specialty, whether it's cloud, whether it's water valves, whether it's all these very unique technical sales things, that's where you really weaponize that vector of opportunity for yourself in driving, guess what my acronym is going to be? Your OTE. How do you get the most value out of yourself in selling yourself in these opportunities?
Yeah, I mean, that's how you go from a 90 to 150K OTE to a 250 to 350, 400K OTE, right? Is having that niche and building on those experiences. With that being said, like, you gotta be in something that you like. So if you start a niche and hate it, get out. Like, find something that you enjoy so you can be good at.
Bail, baby, bail.
But yeah, I think it's important to find a niche.
You're gonna be showing up with cat food coupons saying, I don't understand why I can't get in, if you don't like what you do.
Okay. So you've done the SE manager or manager of SEs before. What did you think of that role?
So for me personally, that's a particularly hard role. There's a lot of bureaucracy in managing other people's time, and driving OKRs, and driving revenue, and a lot of, listening and communicating expectations, where sometimes you have to deliver bad news, but co-chime good news. There are certain people that excel at that. And normally I would say it's a very tough thing for SEs to do, because a lot of the excitement comes from winning deals, working with one person, accomplishing a goal. When you have to manage a team of SEs, the metrics are different, right? You're working on behalf of the business. It's almost like why I can't understand why HR hates me so much personally. Not just based on my behavior, but because their objectives are a little different. You have to align differently when you manage people in that respect. So doing that, I wouldn't say I was bad at it, but I definitely don't think I was the best, if that makes sense.
I mean, managing people in itself is a whole other skill set. That was something I had to learn taking on this role that I take now. And I even had to learn to manage people that I have no authority over. And that's a whole other show. I think that's a great topic to talk about, by the way, is managing others that you have no authority over. Anyway, to bring it back to what we're talking about, though, it's a whole other skill set. And I think the mistake that a lot of companies make is they go, I'm going to make that guy an SE manager because he's a great SE.
Bad mistake.
The two are not the same.
Absolutely not the same at all. And I'll tell you that based on me, right? You put me in front of customers, I'll slay all day. You put me managing a large set of 30 people, I'm not going to do well. I just know my boundaries, and I'm not a bureaucratic person who's checking hours and, expense reports. Keith, we haven't even talked about expenses. managing someone's expense report and asking them, why did you book this room at the Hilton versus this room at the Marriott? That's not personally how I like to spend my time, but yes.
Yeah, I think the position kind of gets degraded if you have a team that behaves like their children, which, let's be real, a lot of SEs do. But still, like, the ones that are truly professionals, like they make the job of an SE manager a lot easier. But like you said, yeah, there's a lot of stuff that you don't think about that goes into it that is just really mundane and boring, like approving expenses, questioning expenses. But then, if you're the type of person that's good at coaching people, if you're the type of person that's good at communicating, right, listening to other people, if you have empathy for others, then I think it's a great role. But if you're just a good SE, that's not enough, right? Then not to say you can't be a great manager, but like that alone isn't enough, because I've had plenty of those managers and they've all
I'll
stuck.
sprinkle in a little bit of again, foreshadowing into other shows we'll do, but that's why I enjoy working at startups. I don't have to maintain status quo bureaucracy. I'm trying to drive revenue and OKRs in generating new business. It's a lot more fun to do that to me versus maintaining 80 SEs who I'm trying to keep them under 5% over average. So that's something we can talk about further too, the type of industry you're in with technical sales and the vertical or, status stage they're at.
Yeah. I got one more thing I want to get your thoughts on before we wrap up for this show. And that's the future of sales engineering. Any sort of potential opportunities. There are any new sort of roles or trends that you're seeing when it comes to SE career paths?
So I want to take an opportunity to harp on this big time. AI, for all its value and for all the excitement everyone has around the capabilities of artificial intelligence, will never, ever replace a sales rep. Mark my words. You can't put an AI in a happy hour and have it sell somebody on what we're doing. So when it comes to technical sales, all the things AI is going to displace, this is not one of them. Not in my opinion.
Yeah. Okay. So you think at least in the future, AI isn't a concern. What do you think about AI? And I think this is, again, a topic for a whole another show, is what do you think is AI? Think of AI as a tool.
AI is an excellent tool.
Do you see that?
Yeah, so recently I had a interview. Our sales leader, he reached out to me about a product that helps record meetings. And what the meetings output will do was it will say, you had a 30-minute meeting with a customer. The AI will say, I think you should give these 3 responses. And they're very articulate responses based on the data gathered from the meeting, based on the data set that you have overall holistically and the objectives of your organization. This will help in SE exponentially. Where it will help in SE, in my opinion, and I really pray this happens, I pray to any God you all believe in, altar of the demo gods, is with RFPs. If I never have to answer another RFP and let an AI run wild on it, that'll be it, Keith.
All right. How do you think that's going to shape career paths, though? How is AI, other than not being a threat, is it a skill that is working with AI a skill that's worth knowing?
So back to my data analytics, so everybody knows I'm a big E too. I'm big E, big S, baby, all around. So AI needs still coaching. It needs accurate data sets from which to pull from. Guess who's going to give them that? Technical sales folks. SEs are going to be the ultimate pool of the data set by which to coach an AI. So the better you can coach and communicate with an AI about what matters in actual responses based on all the things you know as a human being, your value, your niche is exponentially more valuable.
Well, not to get too far down the AI rabbit hole, I also think that's a good way of learning how to communicate as well, is working with AIs. I don't know how much you've worked with ChatGPT, but man, can it give frustrating results sometimes where you're like, oh yeah, I need to better clarify. Of course, you could have asked questions too, dummy, but let me clarify a bit better to head off your questions.
No, you're spot on.
All right. So I don't want to go too far down that rabbit hole. John, this has been a great episode. At least I think. I'm slightly biased. You are too. If you've enjoyed this episode, even if you haven't, please leave us a nice review. It really helps us in the ranks. Tell your friends about us. Tell your colleagues about us. We're the Altar of the Demo Gods podcast. You can, if you have any questions for us or you're interested in being a guest on the show, you can email us at demogodspod@gmail.com. That's demogodspod@gmail.com. And you can learn more about the show, including getting older episodes, by going to demogodspod.com. John, anything you wanna say to our two listeners out there that have listened to this so far?
Well, welcome back. And think about that OTE. How do we drive the value of that?
That's right. OTE. On target earnings. That's the one. And we'll see you next week on the Altar of the Demo Gods podcast.